Introduction. The Tale of Two Graces. Most of us have been taught that grace is a safety net. We treat it like a spiritual emergency fund, something that keeps our head above water when the storms of life hit. We call it making it through, hanging on, or simply surviving. In this book, we call that survival grace. Survival grace is beautiful, but it is incomplete. It is the grace that sustains you in a prison cell or a dark pit. It provides just enough bread for the day and just enough strength to endure the night. It is the steady heartbeat of a person who is waiting for things to get better. It is getting by. But there is another kind of grace. It is the power that does not just help you endure the pit. It is the power that eventually puts you in the palace. We call this thriving grace. The difference between the two is not about how much money you have or how lucky you are. The difference is found in the way you see your world. The survival trap. When you are in a survival mindset, your energy is spent reacting. You are reacting to the bills, reacting to the boss, and reacting to the crisis. You are like a ship in a storm that is focused entirely on pumping water out of the hull. You are staying afloat, but you are not going anywhere. You are waiting for the storm to stop so that you can finally start living. The thriving shift. Thriving grace is different. It is the quiet, steady confidence of a person who knows that the storm is not their master. While the survivor is pumping water, the thriver is setting the sails. Thriving grace is the ability to walk into a place of lack and see a place of plenty. It is the ability to be treated like a servant, but to carry yourself like a king. It is a shift in your inner world that forces the outer world to catch up. Survival grace is about protection. Thriving grace is about possession. Survival grace asks, how will I get through this? Thriving grace asks, how will I rule this? The journey ahead. This book is about the journey from one to the other. We are going to look at the lives of two men who started in the lowest, darkest places imaginable. One was a slave in a foreign land. The other was a penniless immigrant in a smoke-filled factory town. They did not reach the palace because they were rescued. They reached the palace because they stopped using their strength to survive and started using it to thrive. They changed their inner frequency, and the world had no choice but to give them the keys to the kingdom. You were not meant to live your entire life in a state of just enough. You were designed for the palace. It is time to stop surviving the prison and start thriving in the grace you were always meant to carry. Chapter 1. The stripping of the signal. Inherited grace versus the cold start. Every operator in the kingdom begins with a crash. You cannot build a sovereign frequency until the one you inherited is stripped away. This is the great disconnect, the moment the power from the Father's house stops flowing, and you are forced to find the internal generator. The ancient frequency, the rainbow coat. Joseph's life began in a high vibration state, but it was a borrowed signal. The coat of many colors was a physical manifestation of his father's thoughts, a protective layer woven from Jacob's favor. While Joseph wore that coat, he was a receiver. He did not have to manage his own atmosphere because he was draped in his father's. But the coat created static in his brothers. They saw the favor, but they did not see the character required to hold it. When they stripped the coat and threw him into the pit, they were attempting to delete Joseph's identity. They did not realize that by removing the external favor, they were forcing Joseph to activate his internal authority. The modern signal, the broken loom. In 1848, a young Andrew Carnegie sat in a small cottage in Dunfermline, Scotland. His father, Will Carnegie, was a master hand-loom weaver, a man who had lived his life in a comfortable inherited grace of a respected trade. But a global static had arrived, the steam engine. The handloom was becoming obsolete. The coat of the weaving trade was being stripped off the Carnegie family by the cold hands of the Industrial Revolution. Andrew watched his father's spirit break as the orders stopped coming. The inherited frequency of his family's survival was flatlining. Like Joseph in the pit, 12-year-old Andrew realized that the old manual no longer worked. He did not have a rainbow coat. He had a threadbare shirt and an empty stomach. But in that moment of low pressure, Andrew made a sovereign decision. He refused to synchronize with his father's despair. He realized that if the inherited grace was gone, he would have to cross the Atlantic and generate a new broadcast. The mechanics, the sovereignty of the cold start. In both stories, the pit was not a place of punishment, it was a frequency filter. It was designed to separate the man from his safety net, so he could discover the kingdom standard. The identity audit. Joseph had to realize he was not the son with the coat, he was the presence of the kingdom. Carnegie had to realize he was not a weaver's son, he was an architect of the new world. The refusal to sink. Joseph refused to let the pit thoughts of his brothers become his internal broadcast. Carnegie refused to let the poverty thoughts of the dying weaving trade jam his vision. The generation of thriving grace. Even as they were moved like cargo, Joseph on a camel, Carnegie on a cramped immigrant ship, they began to treat their environment as a palace in waiting. They were not victims of the move, they were operators in transit. The revelation for the reader. Are you currently in a pit because your inherited grace has failed? Perhaps your industry has shifted, your covering has disappeared, or the coat of your previous reputation has been stripped away. Do not panic. The stripping of the coat is the first sign that you are being promoted to thriving grace. You are being disconnected from the receiver mode so you can become a transmitter. Like Carnegie on that ship, or Joseph in that caravan, you are currently in the silent hangar, where the only thing that matters is the picture in your mind. The world can take your coat, we write in the manual, but it cannot touch your frequency. The pit is simply the place where you decide to stop being a passenger and start being the pilot. Chapter 2. The Logic of the Bobbin Boy. Managing the static of menial labor. Once the coat is stripped and the loom is broken, the operator enters the most dangerous phase of the journey, the service entrance. This is the stage where the world tries to convince you that your identity is defined by your task. Joseph was sold as a slave. Carnegie was hired as a bobbin boy in a dark, damp cotton factory. To the survival mind, this is the end of the story. To the kingdom operator, this is the first laboratory of thought rule. The ancient frequency, Potiphar's market. Joseph arrived in Egypt as cargo. He was standing on a slave block, surrounded by the high-pitched static of a pagan market. People were bidding on his muscles and his stamina. If Joseph had synchronized with the slave frequency, he would have become a survivalist, doing just enough to avoid the whip. But Joseph held a palace thought. He did not see himself as a slave being sold, he saw himself as a kingdom administrator being positioned. The mechanics. Joseph began to dress the set of his service. He did not just clean Potiphar's house, he governed the atmosphere of the house. Potiphar did not favor Joseph because he was nice. He favored him because Joseph's internal frequency of thriving grace was so strong that Potiphar's own business began to modulate toward success. Joseph was ruling Potiphar's house with his thoughts before he ever held a key. The modern signal, the cellar and the spools. In 1848, 13-year-old Andrew Carnegie descended into the bowels of a cotton factory in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. His job was to tend the bobbins, the wooden spools that held the thread. It was a place of low-vibration misery, dark, soot-filled, and smelling of rancid oil. He earned $1.20 a week. Most of the boys in that cellar were vibrating at the frequency of resentment. They were survival workers, counting the minutes until they could escape the noise. But Andrew was a student of the signal. He realized that the factory was a system of patterns. While his hands moved the spools, his mind was analyzing the source code of the machinery. He did not think like a bobbin boy, he thought like the owner of the process. The shift, Andrew did not stay in the cellar because he was lucky. He stayed in the cellar until his internal frequency became too big for the room. The result, he was quickly promoted to the engine room and then to a telegraph office. Why? Because the palace thought he held in the dark cellar acted like a vacuum, drawing him upward into a higher level of grace. The mechanics, overriding the environment. The secret Joseph and Carnegie both discovered is that service is a frequency, not a job title. Refuse the victim sink. If you are in a low-level job, the world expects you to broadcast low-level energy. If you synchronize with that static, you stay there. The operational standard, you must perform a menial task with a master's frequency. You do not clean the floor to get it done. You clean it to authorize the space with order. The visibility of grace, thriving grace is a visible light. When an operator works in a slave environment, the Potiphars of the world, the managers and owners, instinctively feel a sense of favor toward them. This is not luck, it is the physics of a higher signal, attracting a higher outcome. The revelation for the reader. Are you currently in your bobbin boy phase? Do you feel like your talent is being wasted in a dark cellar of a job that does not recognize your worth? Stop waiting for the promotion to change your thoughts. You must change your thoughts to force the promotion. If you think like a slave, you will require a master to tell you what to do. But if you think like an operator, the palace will eventually come looking for the signal you are broadcasting. The environment does not dictate the frequency, we write in the manual. The frequency dictates the environment. If you hold a palace thought in a cellar, the cellar will eventually have to become a palace. Chapter 3. Decoding the hidden signal. Dreams, clicks, and the source code of opportunity. To move from the cellar to the palace, an operator must develop a specific sensory skill, the ability to see data where others only see static. In the kingdom, this is the gift of interpretation. In the world of industry, it is the gift of systems analysis. Joseph and Carnegie both reached a turning point where they stopped being laborers and started being decoders. The ancient frequency, the dream in the dungeon. While Joseph was in prison, he did not just wait. He began to analyze the internal pictures of those around him. When the cupbearer and the baker had dreams, most people would have dismissed them as soul static, random noise from a stressed mind. But Joseph understood that dreams are thoughts in picture form. They are the source code of the next season. By decoding the pictures, Joseph was actually reading the frequency of the future. He was not just guessing, he was seeing the blueprint before it was built. The mechanics. Joseph realized that the physical world is a monitor and the spirit is the processor. If you can read the code in the processor, you can predict what will appear on the monitor. He gained an unfair advantage because he was the only one in the room who knew how to translate the hidden signal. The modern signal, the language of the clicks. At age 14, Andrew Carnegie moved from the cotton factory to a telegraph office in Pittsburgh. At the time, telegraphers used a ticker that printed dots and dashes on a strip of paper. The operators would then read the paper and translate it into English. It was a slow, manual process of survival translation. But Andrew noticed something. The machine made a specific click for every dot and dash. To everyone else, the clicking was just environmental noise, static that made the job difficult. Andrew began to train his antenna. He sat in the office after hours, closing his eyes and listening to the rhythm. He realized he could decode the signal by ear. He bypassed the paper tape entirely. He was the first operator in the region who could hear the thought as it was being broadcast. The shift: by reading the noise, Andrew became the most valuable asset in the office. He was not just a boy delivering messages. He was a primary interface for the information flow of the city. The result: when the powerful rail executive Thomas Scott walked into the office, he didn't see a messenger boy. He saw an operator who was faster than the machine itself. He hired Andrew on the spot. The mechanics: the advantage of the decoder. The world is constantly broadcasting its next move in the form of patterns, trends, and dreams. Most people ignore these as static. Silence the surface noise. Joseph had to ignore the prison walls to hear the dream. Carnegie had to ignore the office chatter to hear the click. You must stop looking at the problem, the monitor, to see the pattern, the code. Master the language of the industry. Every field has a signal. In business, it is the shift in consumer behavior. In the kingdom, it is the prompting of the Spirit. You must learn to translate these pictures into actions. The authority of intelligence. Information is the currency of the palace. If you can decode what is coming before it arrives, the Pharaohs and Thomas Scotts of the world will eventually have to come to you for the answer. The revelation for the reader. Are you currently overwhelmed by the noise of your life? The chaos of the economy, the static of social media, or the dreams of a better life that seem out of reach? The noise is the signal. Your unfair advantage is hidden in the very thing everyone else is trying to ignore. You must stop being a consumer of data and start being an interpreter of patterns. If you can learn to hear the click in the chaos, you will find the path to the palace is already being broadcast to you. The kingdom does not hide things from you, we write in the manual. It hides things for you. Your promotion is waiting inside the signal you haven't learned to decode yet. Chapter 4. The Integrity Filter. The False Accusation and the Secret Dividend. Before an operator is given the signet ring of a nation or an industry, they must pass the pressure test of character. This is the stage where your thriving grace is challenged by a static attack. For Joseph, it was the lie of Potiphar's wife. For Carnegie, it was the temptation of the inside track and the scrutiny of his early investments. In both cases, the world tried to pull them into a lower frequency of compromise. The ancient frequency, the garment in the hand. Joseph was at the height of his success in Potiphar's house. He was the manager of the palace. But then came the bait. Potiphar's wife attempted to force him into a survival sink, a sexual and political compromise that would have traded his kingdom authority for temporary safety. Joseph chose the prison over the prostitute. He left his garment in her hand and fled. To the world, this looked like a catastrophic failure. He lost his job, his reputation, and his freedom. But in the physics of the spirit, Joseph was protecting the signal. The mechanics. Joseph realized that if he compromised his integrity, he would become resonant with the world system. He would be a successful slave rather than a sovereign heir. By going to prison with a clean conscience, he was keeping his internal hardware uncorrupted for the Pharaoh stage. He chose a temporary pit to avoid a permanent static. The modern signal, the secret dividend. As Andrew Carnegie became the right-hand man to Thomas Scott at the Pennsylvania Railroad, he was introduced to the world of capital. Scott offered Andrew a chance to invest $500 in the Adams Express Company, a secret dividend opportunity. For a young man who had been a bobbin boy, $500 was an impossible sum. He had to mortgage his family's small home to get the money. This was Andrew's integrity filter. He was not being asked to lie, but he was being asked to step into a level of financial risk that would either break his spirit or launch his frequency. Andrew did not use the money for survival, luxury, or comfort. He used the dividend to reinvest in the infrastructure of the future. He stayed lean while he was rich. He refused to synchronize with the greed static of the Gilded Age. Like Joseph, he kept his internal signal focused on administration and growth rather than personal indulgence. The shift, Andrew realized that money is just a physical representation of grace. If you use it to serve the self, survival, it disappears. If you use it to serve the system, thriving, it multiplies. The result, because he managed his first $500 with the integrity of a palace operator, he was eventually trusted with the millions required to build the steel industry. The mechanics, the sovereignty of the no. The palace is a place of high pressure. If you have a leak in your integrity at the prison level, you will explode at the pharaoh level. Identify the bait. The world will always offer you a shortcut that requires you to drop your frequency. It might be a lie, a compromise, or a gray area investment. The long-term logic. Joseph knew that a prisoner with a signal is more powerful than a freeman with static. Carnegie knew that integrity in the small is the only path to authority in the large. The secret dividend. When you pass the integrity filter, the kingdom pays a dividend of confidence. You no longer fear being found out, because your internal and external worlds are in phase lock. The revelation for the reader. Are you facing an integrity test right now? Is someone asking you to leave your garment in a way that feels like a compromise? Or are you being tempted to use your first taste of favor to serve your own survival instead of the kingdom blueprint? Do not take the bait. The prison of doing the right thing is always better than the palace of a lie. If you hold your frequency under pressure, the very accusation or risk you face will eventually become the promotion you have been waiting for. Integrity is the insulation of the signal we write in the manual. Without it, the power of the palace will burn you out. With it, you are indestructible. Chapter 5. The frequency of the gap. The silence of the cupbearer and the panic. Every operator eventually hits the dead zone. This is the space between the promise and the performance. For Joseph, it was the 2 years of silence in the dungeon after the cupbearer was restored. For Carnegie, it was the panic of 1873, a global economic collapse that threatened to erase everything he had built. In this stage, the external data says you are finished. Your human hubs have forgotten you. To the survival mind, this is where you quit. To the kingdom operator, this is where the signal is refined in the vacuum. The ancient frequency, the prison of the forgotten. Joseph had successfully decoded the cupbearer's dream. He had performed with thriving grace and asked for one thing: remember me when it is well with thee. But the cupbearer forgot. For 2 years, Joseph sat in a silent hangar. If Joseph had relied on human favor, he would have spiraled into resentment static. He would have blamed the cupbearer, blamed Potiphar, and eventually blamed God. But Joseph did not check the monitor to see if he was free. He maintained the palace frequency while sitting in the dark. The mechanics. Joseph realized that the gap was a frequency filter. It was stripping away his dependence on people power. The kingdom was waiting for the world to run out of its own answers so that Joseph would be the only source of the signal. He was not waiting, he was insulating his authority. The modern signal, the panic of 1873. By 1873, Andrew Carnegie was no longer a bobbin boy. He was a rising star in the iron and bridge building business. But then the static hit. The American economy collapsed. Banks failed, railroads went bankrupt, and the industry went silent. It was the famine of the 19th century. Most of Carnegie's competitors went into survival mode. They hid their money, stopped building, and waited for the storm to pass. They were forgotten by the market. But Andrew Carnegie had been a decoder in the telegraph office. He knew that the panic was just market noise. While everyone else was vibrating with fear, Andrew used his secret dividends to do the opposite. He started building the Egar Steel Works. The shift. Carnegie did not wait for the cupbearers of Wall Street to remember him. He realized that the famine was the best time to build the storehouses. The result, because he built while others hid, he emerged from the panic as the king of steel. He did not just survive the gap, he owned the gap. The mechanics, the sovereignty of the silence. The gap is where your internal broadcast is tested. If you only have a signal when things are going well, you do not have authority, you have a fair weather reflection. Cut the human hub. You must release the cupbearers in your life from the obligation to help you. If they forget you, it is because the kingdom is preparing a direct link to the palace. Operate in the vacuum. Use the silence to refine your systems. Joseph managed the prison. Carnegie built the steel mill. They both acted as if the promotion was a settled legal fact. The pressure of the call. When the famine or the dream finally hits the palace, the world will be desperate for a signal that did not break during the panic. The revelation for the reader. Are you in a silent year right now? Have the people who promised to help you stopped calling? Does the economy feel like a prison wall closing in? Do not try to rev the motor. You cannot force the cupbearer to remember you. Instead, you must deepen the signal. Use this time to build your steel works in the secret place of your thoughts. When the pharaoh of your industry finally has a dream they cannot decode, they will come looking for the one operator who did not panic in the dark. The gap is not a delay, it is a preparation, we write in the manual. The kingdom uses the silence to ensure that when you finally step into the palace, you aren't carrying any of the world's static with you. Chapter 6. The Palace Frequency. The Pharaoh and the Boardroom. The transition from the gap to the palace is never a gradual climb, it is a quantum leap. It happens when the static of a global crisis becomes so loud that the existing authorities lose their ability to lead. In Joseph's world, it was a supernatural dream of famine. In Carnegie's world, it was the great railroad expansion, a high-stakes era of infrastructure that the old iron masters could not handle. In this stage, the operator stops being a specialist and starts being a sovereign. The ancient frequency, the throne room modulation. When Joseph was finally brought before Pharaoh, he did not enter as a prisoner seeking a pardon. He entered as a decoder, providing a solution. Pharaoh had a dream that the magicians, the consultants of the day, could not translate. They were trying to solve a kingdom's signal with survival logic. Joseph did not just tell Pharaoh what the dream meant, he provided an administrative blueprint. He told Pharaoh how to store 20% of the grain during the years of abundance to survive the years of lack. The mechanics. Joseph was performing atmospheric dominance. He was not asking for a job, he was ordering the future. Pharaoh recognized that Joseph's thought signal was higher than the throne itself. He took off his signet ring and put it on Joseph's hand. Joseph did not get the ring because he was good. He got it because he was the only one who was not vibrating with the fear of the coming famine. The modern signal, the bridge and the boardroom. By the late 1860s, the American pharaohs, the railroad tycoons like J.P. Morgan and the heads of the Pennsylvania Railroad, had a dream of a transcontinental empire. But they had a famine of materials. Iron was too weak for the massive bridges and heavy locomotives required for the future. Andrew Carnegie saw the signal that the old iron masters missed: steel. At the time, steel was a luxury thought, expensive and difficult to produce. But Carnegie went to England, saw the Bessemer process, the source code of modern steel, and realized he could mass-produce it. He walked into the boardrooms of the most powerful men in the world. He did not offer them better iron, he offered them a new world. The shift, like Joseph, Carnegie did not just interpret the need for steel, he built the system of storage and distribution. He integrated the mines, the ships, and the mills. The result, the signet ring of American industry, was handed to him. He became the lead architect of the Gilded Age. The world did not give him the palace, they were forced to build the palace around his frequency of efficiency. The mechanics, the sovereignty of the solution. The palace is not a reward for your struggle, it is a functional necessity for the world's survival. Override the experts. When a crisis hits, the magicians will always try to use survival logic, cutting costs, hiding, retreating. You must broadcast a thriving logic, expansion, consolidation, new systems. The authoritative decree: stop suggesting and start decreeing. Joseph did not say, maybe you should save grain. He said, this is what you must do. Authority is a tone of voice generated by a mind that is 100% sure of its signal. The signet ring of results. In the palace, grace looks like efficiency. If your thoughts produce a result that solves a global famine, the world will give you the resources to manage the entire territory. The revelation for the reader. Are you standing before your Pharaoh right now? Is your industry, your company, or your family facing a famine that the experts cannot solve? Do not go into that meeting as a petitioner. Do not ask for a favor. Instead, bring the solution that you refined in the silent hangar. If you can decode the crisis and provide the blueprint for the storehouse, the signet ring will naturally gravitate to your hand. The palace is looking for the operator who is not afraid of the dream. The Pharaoh is not your boss, we write in the manual. He's the one holding the resources that belong to your blueprint. When you broadcast the answer, the resources must follow the signal. Chapter 7. The Grain Test. The First Visit and the Mirroring of the Pit. Authority is not the end of the journey, it is the ultimate pressure test of the soul. Once you have the signet ring and the steel mill, the people who once threw you into the pit will eventually reappear. For Joseph, it was his 10 brothers bowing in the dust of Egypt. For Andrew Carnegie, it was the old guard of the iron industry and the family members who had stayed behind in the static of Scotland. In this stage, the operator must decide, will I use my power to judge survival or to recalibrate thriving? The ancient frequency, the mirror of the spy. When Joseph's brothers arrived to buy grain, they were vibrating at the lowest frequency of scarcity. They did not recognize Joseph because they could not imagine a slave becoming a sovereign. Joseph, however, recognized them instantly. He did not embrace them yet. He treated them harshly. He called them spies. To the casual reader, this looks like revenge. To the kingdom operator, this was a diagnostic mirror. Joseph was reflecting their own past pit thoughts back to them to see if they had updated their internal software. The mechanics, Joseph was providing survival grace. He gave them exactly what they asked for, grain, but he kept Simeon as a constraint. He was testing to see if they were still enemies of the signal. He realized that if you give palace resources to pit thinkers, they will waste them. He was forcing them to process their own static before he could grant them thriving grace. The modern signal, the old guard. As Andrew Carnegie ascended to the throne of the steel world, the brothers of his past began to resurface. These were the men who had mocked his high-frequency ideas, and the relatives who had doubted his cold start in America. Andrew did not just give away money to everyone who asked. He was famous, and sometimes criticized for his rigid philanthropy. He would not give money for survival, handouts that maintained the status quo. He gave money for thriving libraries, universities, and organs. The shift, Carnegie was mirroring the world's need for growth. When his old associates from the telegraph office or the railroad came to him, he tested them. He wanted to know, are you still thinking like a bobbin boy, or are you ready to manage a library? The result, he became a system administrator for his family and his former peers. He provided the grain, pensions, and support, but he kept the signet ring, the control of the capital, until he saw a shift in their thought code. The mechanics, the sovereignty of the filter. When you reach the palace, you become a resource hub. Everyone will want your grain, but few will want your frequency. The diagnostic harshness. Do not be afraid to test those who return from your past. If you give too much too soon, you anchor them in their survival mode. Mirroring the static. If they come to you with guilt or manipulation, reflect it back to them. Force them to see the glitch in their own system. Joseph made his brothers remember their sin. Carnegie made his peers justify their requests. The logic of the storehouse. Your job is to preserve life, but your higher job is to promote order. You give survival grace to the many, but you reserve thriving grace for those who have proven they can hold the signal. The revelation for the reader. Are people from your pit beginning to show up now that you have favor? Are they asking for your time, your money, or your grain? Do not fall into the empathy trap. If you let their static into your palace, you will lose your peace. Instead, use the Joseph logic. Treat them with the harshness of truth. Give them what they need to survive, but wait to reveal your true identity until you see that they have repented, which simply means they have changed their minds. You are not responsible for their hunger, we write in the manual. You are responsible for the integrity of the storehouse. If you feed the pit thought, you only prolong the famine. If you feed the palace thought, you end it. Chapter 8. The Silver Cup and the Final Reveal. The frequency of total restoration. This is the climax of the thought rule journey. It is the moment where the testing ends and the transformation begins. For Joseph, it was the staged theft of the silver cup. For Andrew Carnegie, it was the final buyout of his rivals and the eventual gospel of wealth. In this stage, the operator moves from being a judge to being a source. The ancient frequency, the cup in the sack. Joseph performed one final system stress test. He hid his personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack. He wanted to see if the brothers would revert to their pit frequency. Would they abandon their youngest brother to save themselves, just as they had abandoned Joseph? Instead, Judah stood up. The man who had once suggested selling Joseph for profit now offered himself as a slave to save Benjamin. The static was gone. The brothers had successfully recoded their internal priority from self-survival to sacrificial order. The moment the frequency shifted, Joseph could no longer restrain himself. He wept so loudly the palace heard it. He revealed his true identity. He did not just give them grain, he gave them Goshen, the best land in Egypt. He moved them from the famine to the franchise. The mechanics. Joseph used the silver cup as a frequency probe. Once he saw that his brothers were no longer pit thinkers, he dropped the harsh mask and invited them into his thriving grace. He proved that the pit was not a destination. It was a classroom that had finally ended. The modern signal, the $480 million exit. In 1901, Andrew Carnegie reached his silver cup moment. J.P. Morgan, the pharaoh of American banking, wanted to buy Carnegie Steel to form U.S. Steel. Carnegie wrote a price on a piece of paper: $480 million, over $15 billion today. Morgan accepted without a word. Carnegie was now the richest man in the world. But he did not use the money to retire into luxury, survival. He moved into the gospel of wealth. He spent the rest of his life giving it all away, not as handouts, but as infrastructure for human thought. He built 2,509 libraries. He believed that giving a man a book was better than giving him bread, because a book allows a man to change his own frequency. The shift: Carnegie stopped competing with the world and started endowing the world. He revealed his true identity, not as a steel master, but as a distributor of possibility. The result: he moved his entire legacy into the Goshen of history. He proved that the purpose of the palace is not to own the world, but to recode it for the next generation. The mechanics: the transition to total source. When the test is passed, the grace changes from conditional to absolute. Look for the repentance, the shift. Do not reveal your full palace power to those in your life until they show they have moved out of survival thinking. When they value the system more than their self, they are ready for Goshen. The reveal of identity. True authority is the power to bless. Once the brothers passed the test, Joseph's only desire was to provide. Once Carnegie had the capital, his only desire was to empower. The Goshen Protocol: stop giving grain temporary fixes and start giving Goshen permanent platforms. If you have reached the palace, your job is to build libraries and storehouses that outlast your own life. The revelation for the reader. Are you holding a silver cup right now? Are you testing the people or the opportunities in your life to see if they are high frequency or low frequency? Do not be afraid of the reveal. If you have mastered your thoughts, you will know exactly when to drop the mask and release the blessing. The ultimate goal of your journey is not to rule over your brothers, but to restore them. You went through the pit and the prison so that you would have the resources to give to those who did not know how to find them. The palace is a responsibility, not a reward, we write in the manual. You are the source. When you change your thoughts, you don't just change your life, you change the blueprint for everyone who follows you. Chapter 9. The Governor of the Future. Legacies of Order and the Blueprint of the Unseen. The final stage of the operator's journey is the transition from presence to precedent. Most people live for the now, survival. Some live for their success, thriving. But the true kingdom architect lives for the future. Joseph and Carnegie both reached a point where their thoughts were no longer just governing their own lives, they were governing the generations to come. They moved from being rulers to being blueprints. The ancient frequency, the oath of the bones. As Joseph aged in Egypt, he was the second most powerful man in the world. He had saved the nation, settled his family in Goshen, and established a system of administration that would last for centuries. But Joseph's mind was already in the next season. He made the children of Israel swear an oath: God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. The mechanics. Joseph realized that the palace in Egypt was just a temporary franchise. His true palace was the promise. By commanding his bones to be moved, he was anchoring the frequency of his descendants. He was telling them, do not get comfortable in the Egyptian static. You belong to the promised signal. Even in death, Joseph's thoughts were the navigation system for a nation. The modern signal, the endowment of the mind. In his final years, Andrew Carnegie did not just spend his money, he institutionalized his thoughts. He created the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the Carnegie Hero Fund. He did not want to be remembered as a steel king. He wanted to be a permanent broadcast of opportunity. By building libraries and funding education, he was ensuring that a Bobbin boy, born 100 years after his death, would have the resources to change their own frequency. The shift, Carnegie moved from managing steel to managing the human potential. He realized that his wealth was just material data, but his strategy for success was the real grace. The result, even today, when you walk into a Carnegie library, you are stepping into a space authorized by his thoughts. He created a palace for the public mind that the static of time he cannot erase. The mechanics, the sovereignty of the legacy. The governor of the future understands that their greatest steel mill or storehouse is the standard they set for others. The extraction of the essence. You must eventually move from doing the work to teaching the frequency. Joseph's bones were his final teaching. Carnegie's libraries were his final decree. The anti-static shield. A true legacy is a shield for the next generation. Joseph's oath kept the Israelites' identity intact in a foreign land. Carnegie's endowments kept the path of upward mobility open during economic shifts. The eternal signal. When you rule the world by thought, you do not need to be physically present to exert influence. Your blueprint becomes the natural law for those who follow. The revelation for the reader. What are you building that will outlast your palace? Are your thoughts focused on your own comfort, or are you establishing a frequency of order for your children, your industry, or your community? Do not just build a life, build a precedent. If you have mastered thriving grace, your greatest responsibility is to endow that grace to others. Whether it is through the oaths you make your family keep, or the libraries of knowledge you leave behind, your goal is to ensure that the signal continues long after your motor has stopped. The palace is a temporary assignment, we write in the manual. The kingdom is an eternal broadcast. Your job is to ensure that when the world looks at your life, they don't just see a success story, they see the manual for their own. The end of the manual, the integrated operator. You have traveled from the pit to the palace. You have seen how Andrew Carnegie and Joseph both navigated the static of the world by maintaining the signal of the kingdom. The question is no longer, will I survive? The question is, what frequency will I broadcast today? Chapter 10. The Maintenance of the Master Signal. Theme: Preventing success static and frequency drift. In the previous chapters, we saw how the integrated operator reaches the palace. But the palace has its own unique danger, the static of comfort. Many who survive the pit lose their signal once they reach the penthouse, because they allow the luxury of the environment to dictate their internal state. The Dolly Parton frequency, the backwoods Barbie defense. When Dolly Parton reached the heights of Nashville and Hollywood, the world system tried to jam her signal. Critics and advisors told her to tone down her look, to sophisticate her image, and to distance herself from her impoverished mountain roots. They wanted her to synchronize with the Hollywood frequency. Dolly refused. She understood a fundamental mechanic of thriving grace: you must never let the palace change the signal that got you there. By leaning into her backwoods Barbie persona, the big hair, the rhinestones, and the thick accent, she created a frequency shield. She remained a mountain girl in a mansion setting, ensuring her internal broadcast remained pure and authentic. The mechanic, the identity anchor. To maintain your signal in the palace, you must establish an identity anchor. Dolly's anchor was her coat of many colors, a literal song and a mental image of her mother's love. The lesson: if you change your frequency to match your new status, you become a product of the palace. If you maintain your original kingdom signal, you remain the governor of the palace. Chapter 11. The Multi-Platform Broadcast. Theme: Scaling the frequency across different domains. Once the operator has mastered their personal environment, the next step in thriving grace is the multi-platform broadcast. This is the ability to take the same source code and run it across entirely different operating systems. The Dolly Parton frequency, the universal operator. Dolly did not stay just a singer. She understood that her frequency of joy and order could be translated into any medium. She moved from music to television, then to film, and eventually into business. The translation: when she built Dollywood, she was not just building a theme park, she was authorizing a physical space with the same spirit of Smoky Mountain hospitality that she put into her lyrics. The scaling. She proved that the same kingdom logic used to write a 3-minute song could be used to manage a multi-million-dollar corporation. The mechanic, domain independence. Most people think their success is tied to their job title. The integrated operator knows their success is tied to their internal broadcast. The lesson: whether Dolly was sitting in a recording booth or a boardroom, the frequency was the same. She wasn't a singer doing business. She was a kingdom operator expressing herself through various platforms. You must learn to decouple your value from your activity. Chapter 12. The Architecture of the New Atmosphere. Theme: designing systems that automate thriving grace. The final stage of the manual is the transition from operator to architect. This is where you move beyond your own lifespan and establish a permanent broadcast that feeds others. The Dolly Parton frequency, the imagination library storehouse. Joseph built storehouses for grain, Dolly Parton built storehouses for the mind. Through her imagination library, she has gifted over 150 million books to children. This is a functional necessity for the next generation. The precedent: she realized that the static of literacy was a barrier to thriving grace for children. By creating a system that automatically mails a book to a child every month, she built an external generator. The system continues to broadcast growth and opportunity even when Dolly is not in the room. The legacy: Dollywood became the largest employer in her home county. She did not just give back, she re-architected the atmosphere of the place she came from, turning a pit of poverty into a palace of industry. The mechanic, the eternal broadcast. The goal of this manual is to ensure that your life becomes a reference point for others. The lesson: Dolly's greatest work is not her awards, it is the atmosphere of possibility she left behind. As an integrated operator, your final task is to build a legacy system, a business, a charity, or a family culture that maintains the frequency of order long after your motor has stopped. The end of the manual: the integrated operator. You have traveled from the pit to the palace. You have seen through Joseph, Carnegie, and Dolly that the world is governed by thought. The question is no longer, will I survive? The question is, what frequency will I broadcast today? A final note from the author. As you turn the final page of this manual, I want you to take a moment to look back at the ground you have covered. There is a profound difference between simply getting by and truly stepping into your purpose. For too long, many of us have lived in a state of prison, not necessarily one with iron bars, but a place where our thoughts are trapped by worry, the fear of not having enough, and the exhausting struggle to just survive the day. It is a weary way to live, always waiting for the next storm to pass. But you were designed for the palace. This isn't just about a building, a title, or a bank account. It is a state of heart where you finally realize you belong in a place of peace, purpose, and plenty. You were created to do more than just weather the storms. You were created to bring order to the chaos and beauty to the places that have forgotten it. The challenges you have faced were not meant to break you, but to show you what you are truly made of. Do not let the noise of the world tell you who you are. Instead, listen to that steady, quiet confidence in your soul that knows you were never meant to stay in the shadows of the prison. Go forward today, not as someone struggling to survive, but as someone invited to lead, to give, and to build. Your life is a gift intended to overflow, lighting the way for everyone who follows in your footsteps. You have everything you need to leave the prison of the past behind and walk firmly into the palace you were always meant to inhabit. The door is open. It is time to step in. Tony Egar. Brisbane, 2026. Palace Thriving Grace. Not prison survival grace. Change a thought today. To change a thought today, you do not need to change your entire life, you only need to change your station. Think of your mind like a radio that has been stuck on a static-filled frequency of worry. Here's a simple 3-step guide to shifting your broadcast right now. 1. Identify the prison static. Notice the next time a thought feels heavy, restrictive, or focused only on surviving the next hour. This is prison static. It usually sounds like, I just need to get through this. What if things go wrong? I don't have enough time, money, energy. The action. Do not fight the thought. Just label it. Say to yourself, that is a survival frequency. It is not my truth. 2. Choose a palace image. The mind cannot be blank, it must be occupied. To eject a prison thought, you must provide a new image. Pick one thing you want to authorize in your life today, not a distant dream, but a quality of being. The frequency of order. Imagine your day flowing with perfect timing. The frequency of plenty. Imagine having more than enough energy to help someone else. The action. Close your eyes for 30 seconds. See yourself walking through your day with the calm, quiet confidence of someone who already owns the building. 3. Make a sovereign declaration. A thought becomes a broadcast when you give it your voice. Interrupt the static with a verbal command. It does not have to be loud, but it must be certain. The action. Speak a simple sentence that aligns with where you are going, not where you have been. I am not just surviving this day, I am governing it. My environment does not dictate my peace dictates my environment. The daily practice. Whenever you feel the walls of your circumstances closing in, remember that the palace is a state of mind before it is a place on a map. By choosing one higher thought, you are flipping the switch from survival grace to thriving grace. Do it once this morning, once at noon, and once before sleep. You are the operator. You hold the dial. Start broadcasting. Palace Grace. 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 Introduction. The Tale of Two Graces. Most of us have been taught that grace is a safety net. We treat it like a spiritual emergency fund, something that keeps our head above water when the storms of life hit. We call it making it through, hanging on, or simply surviving. In this book, we call that survival grace. Survival grace is beautiful, but it is incomplete. It is the grace that sustains you in a prison cell or a dark pit. It provides just enough bread for the day and just enough strength to endure the night. It is the steady heartbeat of a person who is waiting for things to get better. It is getting by. But there is another kind of grace. It is the power that does not just help you endure the pit. It is the power that eventually puts you in the palace. We call this thriving grace. The difference between the two is not about how much money you have or how lucky you are. The difference is found in the way you see your world. The survival trap. When you are in a survival mindset, your energy is spent reacting. You are reacting to the bills, reacting to the boss, and reacting to the crisis. You are like a ship in a storm that is focused entirely on pumping water out of the hull. You are staying afloat, but you are not going anywhere. You are waiting for the storm to stop so that you can finally start living. The thriving shift. Thriving grace is different. It is the quiet, steady confidence of a person who knows that the storm is not their master. While the survivor is pumping water, the thriver is setting the sails. Thriving grace is the ability to walk into a place of lack and see a place of plenty. It is the ability to be treated like a servant, but to carry yourself like a king. It is a shift in your inner world that forces the outer world to catch up. Survival grace is about protection. Thriving grace is about possession. Survival grace asks, how will I get through this? Thriving grace asks, how will I rule this? The journey ahead. This book is about the journey from one to the other. We are going to look at the lives of two men who started in the lowest, darkest places imaginable. One was a slave in a foreign land. The other was a penniless immigrant in a smoke-filled factory town. They did not reach the palace because they were rescued. They reached the palace because they stopped using their strength to survive and started using it to thrive. They changed their inner frequency, and the world had no choice but to give them the keys to the kingdom. You were not meant to live your entire life in a state of just enough. You were designed for the palace. It is time to stop surviving the prison and start thriving in the grace you were always meant to carry. Chapter 1. The stripping of the signal. Inherited grace versus the cold start. Every operator in the kingdom begins with a crash. You cannot build a sovereign frequency until the one you inherited is stripped away. This is the great disconnect, the moment the power from the Father's house stops flowing, and you are forced to find the internal generator. The ancient frequency, the rainbow coat. Joseph's life began in a high vibration state, but it was a borrowed signal. The coat of many colors was a physical manifestation of his father's thoughts, a protective layer